here's my switcher, Union Pacific O-rail two rail O scale, and I wanted to have a dual gauge layout for at least a little while, and so I created a interchange where my O scale and On30 engine can both come into the track and follow each other, and you're seeing that happen very naturally, very easily. And my wonderful spouse is actually doing a terrific job of keeping them really close to one another. A very tight shot, and you can see they're running across the gorge. You can see the three-rail track that they are going through, and come across the bridge, and eventually, very naturally, the On30 will pull out through an interchange right there, while my O-scale engine goes straight through and relaxes. And when you just saw that little bump, I'm going to show you what not to do in making that interchange during the video. So yeah, just a lot of fun. And
okay,
then,
here we go into the building phase of these dual gauge system. As I mentioned, I take a Atlas track, two rail O, and I pull out these pieces, or I keep this one and I get a third one that I put in the middle. And the second, after this little chunk, we'll talk about how to glue that on. But in case you are a 3D printing kind of person, I created an STL file that has the little tabs in here that you can just slide the rails into, right? So you would slide all three rails through here and the central rail through here, and it'll create that 3D print. I put that into the into Thingiverse, and it's the hashtag is dual gauge. So you should be able to just print this file, and if you print a whole bunch of these, you can just slide the rails through, and it's designed with to be flex track, given the resin and details that I put into that hashtag. So effectively, it looks like this. Here's your dual On30. Here is the O scale. All right, if you're not a 3D printer, the next part of the video is how to actually glue this third rail here down onto the Atlas track and keeping the right distance. Let's chat on how to make the dual gauge track. So the first thing I do is I start with the Atlas two rail O scale track, and you're going to need 3 of these to make 2 of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate one of these, and it's flex track, right? So I'm going to remove one of these. I'm going to remove both, right? And then I'm going to take the next one like this, and I'm going to glue the one of these 2 that I've removed in the middle, or in middle-ish. And that process is long, but it's just go slow. So the first thing is you've got to put this down solid in the shape that it's going to be, right? So with all the curve that you're going to want, and S-shaped or whatever else. And you saw that in my layout, it's curved on top of that of the bridge. And then I'm going to take one of the tracks, and I'm going to glue it in the center. And you can see this is the distance for the On30 track, right? So here's a Bachmann On30, and you can see that that distance is the right distance, right? And you want to make sure it's on the correct side of where the track is going to come in, or it's going to come into it this way, right? Otherwise, that'll be a real challenge. So the way that I fix this is you don't have to do anything with these two because they've got little tabs that are holding the track down. But I wanted to reproduce those little tabs in some way. Now remember, this track, the profile of this track, is much taller than the profile of an On30 track. So I can put glues down in the center of this thing here such that it's elevated and it won't touch the flange as the On30 train goes through. And what I've done, and you can see this, is I put a weight to fix this in its in the center rail in the right position. And then I put some super glue, and then I put a little bit of baking soda on top of the super glue on both sides, and I do one at a time and just move. And I also have a block in here to ensure that the distance that I'm gluing that center track on is always in the right location. And as you go along, you'll eventually see that it stays fixed. Once that super glue and baking soda sort of gel completely together, it takes a little bit, but they will form this very strong bond. This has been here for about 5 years. Then the next thing that I did is I just age the track to sort of hide that super glue baking soda joint. And you can use a lot of things to age it. You can use, this is an orange paint, acrylic paint, and then I just use my finger to wipe it off to keep the top clean and have a contact. So not complicated, but it does take a little bit of time, and you just want to make sure that the distance of that center track is right for the On30. The next challenge, of course, is, as you saw in my layout, these two came out of the track and led the train off the track. And I do move this rail, this rail. I take it and I take it, feather it out into the curve. The problem is, of course, that I don't want to just keep on using the Atlas rail because one, of course, the ties are too long, but two, I would have to keep gluing over and over again. I want to transition from this to the On30 track as quickly as I can. Not too fast, but as quickly, because this is much easier to use. And again, this is also flex track. And I use the 00 scale for pico track for this. So yeah, the transition, of course, is a little funny in that you have to raise this track, has to be raised as you come up here, and you of course can't use you can't use rail joiners because then it would be sitting way too low, right? So you really have to just match them up at the right height by raising this track, and then on the outside here I use just a dab of solder with this one. There won't be any rail joiners, but I just use a little bit of solder, and that's it. And then I make sure, I use files between here and here to make sure that the train can transition between these pretty smoothly. And that's what you saw in my layout. That whole transition process was from here to here with the curvature and how the center track was glued down and fastened on here. So yeah, just a little bit of patience.
This is the track plan for getting that train on and off the dual gauge O scale connecting to the ON30. And so the first things first, the red colored lines are the same polarity in your DCC or in your DC system. The green ones are also the other polarity. And what you have to do is, of course, ensure that they don't touch and that they don't touch as the wheels are going by. So this is where you're seeing these purple things. Have a couple reasons for them. One is in these cases here, it's to really make sure that when the wheels go through this interchange, they don't actually touch the other track. This one here, as we'll talk about that, is it locks the wheel as it's going through here um, to to keep it from wiggling around back there. We'll go through those details. And as we talked about, this is the uh, Atlas track. The Atlas track keeps on going for a little bit, and then out here somewhere it starts converting to the Pico OO track for ON30. So notionally, this is not too complicated, but you do have to be careful. Here is what looks like the transition, the curvature is much smoother or much gentler than the one that I show in the diagram. And you can see this piece of wood that's here. You can see the piece of plastic and the various things that are in this interchange location. And this is what we're going to work through is how to do all of this work. All right, the first thing to realize is that the width of the gap must allow, this width here must allow the O scale wheel to go through. And there's some wiggle between here, so it can't have too much, it can't be too small, but at the same time, you don't want it to be too wide because then when the ON30 wheel goes through here, it would sink, it would kink down into a hole that's wider. So there's kind of a good distance and too much and too little. It's trial and error. It's always easier uh, to remove than to add. So just keep it small and little cuts at a time. So just trial and error. Again, the width here has to allow a um, ON30 track and ON30 wheel. Similarly here, an ON30 wheel has to go through that gap. So just little bits at a time. So let's talk about the sizes of these insulators, these purple things here. So this purple one triangle that I have here has to be wide enough such that the wheel of the O scale track as it's going over never contacts the red one, right? So you have to make this long enough so that when this goes over, these two don't come into contact. That's the trick. These little ones here, they can actually just be a thin piece of plastic that you just glue on front of the rail. So it doesn't have to be as sort of thick as is shown here, right? So not too complicated for this little piece of triangle. And, you know, I just carved it out of a piece of plastic. Um, the other thing to realize is that this wheel, as I mentioned, this wheel has wiggle this way. So it can wiggle back and forth, and as it's on this green polarity, you don't want it to touch the red polarity here. That's why you want this particular um, piece of plastic here, is it will keep this from contacting with this as this wiggles back and forth. So yeah, just make sure nothing causes short effectively. And then lastly, as we are, again, the wheels on the ON30 wiggle back and forth. So as it's on the red track, it could potentially hit this green, the green polarity and cause a short. So again, you want just a connector here that would keep it from uh, um, uh, causing a short. This is that piece of wood that we chatted about that's right here, because as the wheel comes in, it gets locked in and doesn't allow too much wiggle, right? And part of what my experience was that when there was too much wiggle and there's too much space this way and a little too much space this way, it can just almost derail as it's going through here. And the real problem was the On30 wheels, not the O scale wheels, because the O scale wheels are so big by comparison. So yeah, just a piece of wood here that locks it into place is a quite nice thing to really make sure you don't get derailments. I, eventually I'm going to paint it black so that it doesn't show up as starkly as you saw it in the picture. So yeah, this is keep the insert small, keep the gaps as small as you can. Engines like constant current, and as I mentioned, any gaps in here will cause the wheel to sort of sink into that gap. So small as possible, but big enough such that you don't have any shorts. That's kind of the philosophical approach you're going to want to choose here. So